I absolutely love optical illusions. The fact that I can trick the brain and the eyes into thinking something that's not true is just super fascinating to me. And so, two straight lines here, they're the exact same length. But if I come off of them, and draw some additional lines, I can trick your brain into thinking one is shorter and one is longer. So I'm gonna talk about this illusion along with a couple of other ones like the moon illusion on this video on the Eye Doctor Near Me channel. So the reason the brain does this is because of a thing called size constancy. The brain wants to keep things relative to the surrounding environment and what it already knows. So when I put those lines on, I basically told the brain, these aren't just straight lines anymore. These are corners of walls. And so whenever I did this, I told you that it's the forward closest wall to you. And when I did this, I told the brain that it's the furthest away wall. And I can convince your brain even further, and I can trick it even more, that those lines are further in size difference simply by telling the brain, yep, here's some windows. Let's go ahead and confirm your assumption, brain, that these are in fact corners of walls. And that is how this illusion works. So then how does that moon illusion work? How is it and why is it that when the moon is directly overhead, it looks smaller than whenever it's on the horizon? And the answer is pretty simple, actually. When the moon is directly above our head, it appears smaller because we don't have anything to compare it to. We just have an idea that there's this object in the sky up there, probably not that far away because we can actually see it, and everything else in our world that we can see is usually close at hand. And so our brains doesn't have anything to compare it to, so it assumes that it must be smaller. As it gets further onto the horizon, now we have something that our brain can compare it to. It can compare it to trees, it can compare it to buildings and all those things. So now when we see it, it's still the same size, but the brain says, wow, this thing must be huge because look how far off it is. I can see this building and I know that building is huge. I can see this tree and I know that tree is huge. I can see these mountains and those mountains are huge. And because of that fact, and I can still see this object, clearly the moon must be huge. And so it is not actually larger, smaller. It's the brain getting tricked by this size constancy. The same exact thing that whenever I drew those lines, I could make the brain think it's a different size, even though they really aren't, just by putting things into context. And so that is why people have thought for years and years and years that the moon must be getting closer. That's why it gets bigger. Reality is it stays pretty much the exact same distance from us. The brain just interprets it differently because it has different things it can grab hold of. So we have ran MRIs on people's brains looking to see where does the discrepancy happen? Where do we fall apart kind of deal? And it's found very early in the visual processing system. And so we know that whenever we get further along that chain, there's more logic that the brain's plugged into things and it's less likely for us to get confused. Whereas early in the system, early in the cortex, is where all the confusion and the discrepancies happen.